Hi, guys. Welcome to our fifth session of the Travel Entrepreneurial Development Program. We actually have two guest speakers today that we're really excited about. But before we get started, if you have not checked in, there's a QR code that's on the screen as well as a link in the chat. Please check in. Okay. So our program schedule, our remaining classes are legal strategy and entity formation, which is today. Pitch Decks 101, which is Wednesday. Pricing strategy, which is Monday. Sales and financials, which is next Wednesday. Pitch practice and feedback is the 26th. Pitch practice office hours, which is optional to everybody, August 28th. So our first guest and our first speaker, who we're really excited about, is Peyton. Peyton today is discussing legal strategy and entity formation. He's going to be doing about 30 minutes today. We'll try to pause after each slide, just to open up the floor for questions. He is part of the Cherokee Nation, the acting director of the Indian Energy Service Center. His expertise is in business planning, financial analysis, and tribal utility formation. Our second speaker today is also legal strategy and entity formation, is from 6 to 6:30, and we'll try to open up the floor for Q&A. Chris Myers, who is the co-chair of investment management group, Holland and Hart. His expertise is in company counseling, private fund investments, and regulatory compliance. I'm going to go back to Peyton. Peyton, I'll hand it off to you if you want to share your screen. If you want to start with a quick introduction of some of the things that you've done or highlights of your career, that would be great.
Sounds great. Yeah, we'll do. 1 second. Let me get this shared and then we'll jump right in. How's that looking? There we go. I can see it on the screen up there. Let me just go forward one slide. All right. Is that looking good?
Perfect.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. So I will try to keep this presentation very high level and I'll let our attorney friends handle the details. So, my professional background is I've worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors for about 15 years. I'm currently the acting director of the Indian Energy Service Center. We do a lot of regulatory work out in the energy space, mostly oil and gas, but also with renewable energy. I spent 13 years in the Division of Energy and Mineral Development, where I gave away federal grants and provided technical assistance to tribes, mostly in the utility formation space, but also in project development, business planning, and financial planning for tribes in the energy space. So really helping them develop business plans and project plans for energy projects that they wanted to develop and getting them grants or loan guarantees or commercial debt, whatever it is that they wanted to do and how they wanted to finance their projects. We worked with them on that. And then outside of the federal government, I co-founded with my family a dental practice. We ran that for about 9 years and we sold that in 2019 to a private equity-backed buyer. And then I've also been on served on the Denver Indian Center nonprofit board for 11 years. I've been the treasurer there for a while. So playing in all the different spaces that I can play in, and it's been really interesting. And as my introduction noted, I'm enrolled member of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and I was born up in Pine Ridge. So I'm not from Nevada, but I've traveled all around the country doing work and love working with tribes and tribal members on starting businesses. So I'll jump right in to kind of a 101 on what are these entity options. And I always like to present this slide with a very high level view and understanding of specifically what tribes and tribal members have as options for business development entity options. And it's very unique, and it's something that a lot of the population of the United States does not have these opportunities. So 101 is you can form a business under really 3 different types of laws, right? Under tribal law, state law, and federal law. Federal law, obviously, I think as our attorneys will note, regulate a lot of the activities of all of these entities. But just to give you kind of a really broad understanding. Under tribal law, you can form tribal instrumentalities and tribal political subdivisions. I'll go into exactly what are kind of common business activities or tribal government activities under each of these. One really important thing to note is that if you would like to charter a business under your tribe's laws, they must have those laws in place, and a lot of tribes don't. So having this critical business legal infrastructure in place is very important for tribes to allow entrepreneurship within their jurisdictions and on their land. So if your tribe does not have corporations codes, LLC codes, uniform commercial codes. That should be something that tribal leadership should be looking into. Every state has them, right? So if you are at a tribe that does not necessarily have these in place, that is okay. You can default to state law. So state law is the most familiar. It's the standard state law corporation, nonprofit corporations, state law chartered limited liability, LLCs, companies, sole proprietorship, partnerships, all of the standard business entities that you've likely heard of can be formed under state law, and I'll show you how to do that in Nevada. And then also under federal law, there's really two unique ways that you can charter business entities if you're a tribe. So Section 17 corporation is for a wholly owned tribal corporation. An interesting fact about the Section 17 corporation is that it is formed underneath the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. Section 16 is what provides for tribes to have tribal constitutions and bylaws. So you can see how closely the writers of that were thinking about business development with tribes as well. So Section 17 corporations, very unique, only available to tribal governments and can only be wholly owned. They cannot have outside investment. And then there's also an entity type called a TIDO, or a Tribal Energy Development Organization. And I won't go too far into that. I usually do that with our tribal leadership and when I'm giving presentations to tribal governments that are interested in energy development. This is a very unique business entity that allows you to have the same eligibility as a business entity with outside investment as a tribal nation would. So you would be eligible, if you formed a TIDO, you would be eligible for the same grant and loan guarantee programs that incentivize business or energy development on tribal lands as a tribal nation itself would be, as the tribal government is. So it's a very unique and interesting business structure. So what are some of the common uses for all of these things? So tribal instrumentalities and political subdivisions, these are all the tribal programs that you're probably familiar with. And utility districts and utility authorities, right? Those are the space that I work in a lot. They're often formed under those two types of entity structures. Tribally chartered corporation or LLCs, those are tribal development corporations. They could be individual entrepreneurs doing business on tribal lands. They could be nonprofits that want to charter under the tribe's business codes. And there are some tribes that have robust business codes out there. So if you're a member of one of those tribes or living on those tribal lands, this may be something that would be available to you as an individual entrepreneur. So something to look into. Most common is obviously the state law corporation, LLCs. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these other than that C Corps, S Corps, LLCs are likely what you would utilize in your entrepreneurship journey here. So I'll jump into that in just a second and show you how you can form one of those in Nevada. And then, like I said, Section 17 companies, they're generally used by tribal nations as holding entities to partner with outside investment. They can be members of LLCs, and it's really a unique corporate type. The only way it can be dissolved is through an act of Congress. So it's a very rigid and stable business entity structure. So and I don't want to say that I've never seen one dissolve, but I have. But it's something that if you're in a very politically intense environment, which I think a lot of us who are tribal members and have visited tribes know that it can be full contact, football and politics sometimes with at tribes. This may be an entity type that can stabilize some of the business development activities of the tribe. And then I already talked about Tito, so I'm not going to talk about that again. Any questions on that just at the top?
Any questions? Oh, we have two in the room, including Maggie.
Sure.
What are the different tax implications for these different types of entities? For example, is the Section 17 corporation subject to US federal taxes?
I will get into that. Yeah, I have a slide on that. And
Okay.
generally, and I say generally because there are exceptions to everything, okay? A Section 17 is a non-taxable entity just like the tribal government would be, generally. Depends on the business activities it is doing and where it is doing business, okay? So very important. And I'm sure our attorney friends will also answer that as well. But I have another slide on taxation. I'll bring that up.
One more question. How have you seen Nevada corporations for a while? I kept hearing just incorporate in Delaware, and that was like the thing to do for a while. Is that still a thing, or is like Nevada kind of shifting things because of maybe things that were passed not too long ago? How do you weigh incorporating in Delaware as opposed to Nevada?
I think that is an excellent question for Chris, potentially. I'm not sure if Chris wants to chime in on that now or wait until presenting later.
Chris hasn't joined yet, so we'll have to ask the question later.
Yes.
I'm on. This is Chris. Sorry.
Hi, Chris.
There's Chris. Hold on,
Sorry.
Chris. I'm passing it back.
Thank you. I'll ask it again. Oh yeah. So for a while, I would hear that the thing to do is just incorporate in Delaware. I'm a Delaware corporation. That's what they do in Delaware. That's what they've really been focused on, becoming a incorporation friendly place. And so a lot of people did that there. But in previous months, maybe not in recent years, has that changed? Has Nevada done new things that make it a competitive place to incorporate in as opposed to Delaware?
Yeah. So one of the unique things about what jurisdiction makes sense is really it's not one size fits all. So venture, if you go back a few years and you were looking to raise outside investment capital from someone that had done it before, right? A sophisticated investor, whether it be a person that's invested in a lot of startups or a big venture fund out of the Bay Area. The big desire was for Delaware. And the reason for Delaware is because it has the best business courts in the country. It's called the Delaware Chancery Court. And the predictability of outcomes in the Delaware Chancery Court, they're not exactly certain, but there's lots of case law around unique issues that investors like to have certainty on. Nevada was sort of a flyover state as far as incorporation goes. And then, a handful of years ago, the Nevada economy really started to boom. You had a lot of people moving to Nevada. You had people that were coming here for a lot of things: no income tax, low corporate tax, low corporate franchise taxes, and then you have all these big, large publicly traded casinos here. And I think a lot of people said, well, you have these big publicly traded casinos, some of which are Nevada, not all. By and large, I think for the most part, most are Delaware. But I should say, it's that migratory pattern of people saying, well, maybe Nevada is not all that bad. And then, Nevada has if you're an officer or director of a Nevada corporation, you have kind of a very predictable sort of, what is my duty to the company and my duty to the stockholders? That duty is probably a little lower in Nevada than it is to a lot of other states. And I think it's just Nevada is very big on statutory interpretation. So a lot of our law for corporations is in Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 78. And so you started to see some really big companies say, okay, I'm going to reincorporate from Delaware to Nevada. And that really sort of kind of led the charge. And you had, Nevada all of a sudden became a very popular place to incorporate. And so I'm seeing more folks incorporate in Nevada now. but I think it's always a facts and circumstances based analysis that a business owner wants to discuss with their lawyer. The good news is, you know, if you are in Nevada, you can change to Delaware. If you're in Delaware, you can change to Nevada. And there's ways to do that to keep your EIN and really just, you know, not have it be a new corporation, but just a continuation under, you know, either Nevada or Delaware law. So I think Nevada is becoming more popular, but Delaware still kind of rules the day if you're looking to take outside investor capital from sophisticated investors.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions for Peyton? Oh, Maggie?
So I have another question for Peyton. So Peyton, you mentioned that it depends on where people are doing business. So if you are a tribal chartered corporation, are you able to do business outside the tribal lands?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I'll wait for your tax slide then.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Any questions online for Peyton?
No, the questions online were, will we share these slides? Will you guys both share your slides with us so we can share them with our students?
Yep. Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You got it.
Back to you, Peyton.
Thank you. That was a great answer by Chris. All right. So jumping back in, how to actually form your business, you know, generally you go to the Secretary of State website, right? That's where we can find, and within each state, some states are a little different, but Nevada, you can go to the Secretary of State website. There's an excellent new business checklist on there that walks you through all the steps, the foundational steps you'll need to form your business entity, select its type, and go through the registration process on there. You can also hire a lawyer and they can help you do that as well, right? It is a little pricey in the state of Nevada. Actually, it costs about $540, at least on my very brief research, looking through what you need to do to register your business in the state. This is for an LLC, of course. You know, corporations are a little different. So one thing I always like to bring up, because it is something that I went through and it was a problem, is on the state site in every state, you can check registered business names in the state. You also need to go to the USPTO, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website and check nationally to ensure that your business name and trademark, DBA, whatever it is that you're going to utilize, you want to make sure that it is available. So when we registered, it was called Sage Dental Care back in 2010. We were the first one to register that trade name. And then a lot of Sage Dental Cares popped up and we had to defend this nationally. So you can see on here, this is just what a search result looks like for a business trade name search. Make sure you go and search the USPTO so you don't run into the same problems that I did, and make sure that you are defending your trade name and trademarks as you're doing business. So just throwing that out there, something that I had to deal with for a number of years that was a pain. So just make sure you check both the state and the USPTO as well. Okay, so you brought up taxes. So business entity options, what are the key considerations that you should be looking into from a very high level perspective? The number one thing is taxes, 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 right? So we already brought up a little bit about corporate, the uniqueness of Section 17 tribal corporations, wholly owned. Like I said, they are wholly owned by a tribe and generally retain the non-taxable entity status of that tribe. They also retain sovereign immunity, just like the tribe does. So when they enter into business contracts, this is something that, you know, in the lending space was really important, that the banks that were experienced working with that entity type would make them waive their sovereign immunity via a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. So there are things that can get around all of these entity issues that need to be taken into consideration. So very high level pass-through taxation, right? That's what you hear about when you're engaged in an LLC, sole proprietorship, or partnership, right? Generally, the members pay the taxes on profits from an LLC, sole proprietorship, partnership on their individual tax return, right? On an individual basis. Corporations pay a corporate tax and have to file a corporate income tax return. So, and right now that's at 21%. And then you as an individual, if you're receiving a payment from that corporation, a dividend, a share of those profits, you will also pay an individual income share. That's why, you'll have to file a tax return on an individual basis as well. That's why we call it double taxation, because the corporation itself is paying a corporate income tax, and you as an individual, you have to pay an income tax on whatever you generate as a profit out of that entity. So something to be aware of in the corporate structures. There are ways, very unique ways. In I know the last time I did this presentation, we had an attorney that went through some very interesting ways to take advantage of the corporate structure and get around some of these taxation issues. So, getting an attorney that is very experienced in your state and understands all the tax considerations is very important as you're going through this. What else may drive the business entity options that you have? As Chris noted, if you're approaching sophisticated investors, they may drive you to a specific entity type. They may drive you to register that business in a certain jurisdiction that they are familiar with and they like. And I always say, he who holds the gold makes the rules. So where do you want to raise money and who are you taking money from? That will guide what type of entity options are available to you. So I started in the grant space. I gave away federal grants for about 13 years. There's also state level grants, foundation grants, etc. Right? There's a lot of grant opportunities for free dollars. Those grant opportunities may be only available to nonprofits. They may be only available to business entities that are formed in Nevada. They may be only, there's a whole wide ranging criteria of eligibility. And if you're going to go after that money, you want to be aware of those entity requirements that they may have for giving money away via a grant. Also with debt, commercial debt, bank loans, loan guarantees, and individual lenders, they may have a preferred entity type that they like to lend to in certain business categories. So be aware, talk with these lenders, talk with these people, make sure you understand what their requirements are before you get too far down that path. And then finally, tax incentive financing. This is something that comes up in the energy space and housing space a lot. So if you're thinking about starting a business that's in either of those industry sectors, you're going to want to be aware of what tax incentive financing may be available. These are things like tax equity, new market tax credits, or other tax credit incentives like hub zone, opportunity zones. These may be things that your business will be eligible for. And one thing I bring this up, especially when speaking with tribal leaders, is that they often want to retain their non-taxable status. And in the energy space, until the most recent Inflation Reduction Act, they'll change this. In order to raise the money that's needed to make a lot of renewable energy projects financially solvent, you needed to be a taxable entity. And tribes were very much against this. But I often said you either have a project or you don't if you make your business taxable, especially when you're looking at an investment tax credit that can be 30 to 70% of that project value, right? So making sure you're aware of if you form a taxable entity, you will be taxed, but you might also be eligible for incentives that may not be available to you if you retain a non-taxable status or a nonprofit status. So very important. I put a list down there of some of these business tax credits that are available. There are a ton of them, and the IRS website has a listing of those that you can explore and look at. Ownership model is another key consideration that you want to take into account. Are you going to be 100% individual owned business? Are you going to raise money from the 3 F's, your friends, your families, and fools? Or are you going to go out and look for, as Chris alluded to before, sophisticated third-party equity investors? These are accredited investors, institutions that might want to invest, private equity, angel, venture capital, right? These are all things that may be available to you. Just make sure that you are aware that taking money and raising raising money is a highly regulated activity, and there are a ton of considerations you need to have when you are taking money from people. So make sure you speak with somebody like Chris or another attorney that is experienced in your state and with your business industry and really is aware of what type of money raising activities you are engaged in. Also, the last two here, workforce retention. Do you want to provide some sort of stock option incentive or other equity incentive to people who may come on with you early in a company or as you grow the company? That's something that needs to be well thought out in advance of providing those incentives. And they're also regulated activities. So you need to speak with an attorney, make sure you have that structured appropriately for your business. And then finally, tax equity partners. These are often some of the most sophisticated investors out there. And bringing in these type of structures requires lawyers, attorneys, and very sophisticated financing structures. So anytime you're talking tax equity, like I did with tribes before the IRA, it's something that takes a lot of time and due diligence. So just something to consider there. What are the other considerations? What are your annual registration fees? What meeting requirements might you have, right? Within corporations, you have quarterly, annual shareholders meetings. These are things that you need to look into and make sure you understand what the licensing and paperwork requirements are for your specific entity type in your business industry and what your jurisdiction requires. What is the existing legal infrastructure where you're operating? This is really important with tribes, especially tribal members that are engaged in business activities on reservation lands, trust lands, restricted lands. You need to be aware of what that legal infrastructure is that is in place in regulating business activities. Speak with your tribal leadership. Make sure you understand what it means to operate a business within their jurisdictions. And if you're confused, always consult an attorney who's experienced with it. And then when I'm speaking with tribal leadership, how is your current tribe organized? What does your org chart look like? And how does this new potential business entity fit? And making sure that it has a clear fit within your org chart is extremely important. And then finally, taxation again, especially working with tribes and tribal members. Don't always assume that you are not taxable. There may be sales tax. There may be other income taxes that you will be required to pay as you're operating businesses. Just be very aware of what is required with wherever you are operating that business. And then, you know what? I'm going to leave it there. There's a great comparison on the SBA.gov website, the Small Business Administration's website, that compares all these different entity options from a very high level, just as I just did here, that you can go and check out. But I'm going to leave it right there. And I think we can get into some more questions if you'd like.
Any questions from in the room? Any online? Oh, we have two.
Okay, you can go.
Okay. I hog the pace. Oh, please. As my sneakers squeak all the way over.
With the prior art search or the USPTO search, does it, if you register a name, but it's in a different industry than an existing already like registered name, is that okay? Or if a name is already registered, you just can't register it even if you're doing something different than the already registered entity?
That probably depends on how the entity that already has that wants to defend their trademark. I would say that you're setting yourself up for some issues if no matter what industry it is. But I am not a patent or trademark attorney, so take that with a grain of salt.
Maggie?
So my question is about, you mentioned the current tribal org chart. So it seems from what you're saying as if the tribal org chart will include the businesses. Oh, this is very nice. Thank you. All right. So are individuals also part of the org chart as well as entities that are businesses?
General individual entrepreneurs generally would not be part of the tribal org chart unless you're partnering with a tribe on a business activity.
Okay, and so can a tribal, here's a different question. Can a tribal corporation look for an opportunity zone to set up their business in?
When you say opportunity zone, do you mean the actual designation of
Yes.
an opportunity zone?
Yeah.
I am not familiar. I have not looked into opportunity zones in a while. So I am going to default to somebody who actually understands those better. So I don't want to lead you down any false roads there.
Well, all right. So then generally speaking, is a tribal corporation that wants to do business better off doing it on tribal land rather than on, state land?
Oh, that can totally vary. Really depends on what the business activity is that they're engaged in. In the utility space where I normally work, at utility and energy space, they may have a automatic monopoly, right, within their jurisdiction. So, they can effectively be the only utility that's allowed to provide service in their territory. If you're looking at, the other types of businesses, there are Section 17 corporations that do IT contracts, landscaping for bases, you name it, they're engaged in that business activity on and off tribal lands.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. So it really depends. It really depends.
Any questions? Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, there's one.
Oh, there's one.
Okay, from online, from Dawn, she is asking to please discuss licenses for selling online businesses in Nevada or on the reservation.
I am not familiar with Nevada licensing. Chris, that might be a Chris question.
Probably.
This is Chris. I will say, I'm unfortunately the lawyer answer to a lot of stuff is I don't know. I don't practice in that area. This is one of them. It really depends upon what you're selling. I will say sales and use tax for entities that sell online is an extremely important area for a business owner to understand. There are some folks that think, well, I'm online. I don't have a physical location. Sales tax doesn't apply to me because I'm selling to somebody in Arkansas and I'm based in North Dakota. But sales and use taxes across state through interstate commerce is a huge issue to look into. And then, depending upon what you're selling, there's all different kinds of licenses. If you're selling a generic consumer good, reselling clothing or something like that, versus you're selling something, trying to transport alcohol, tobacco, or something that is in a classified category across state lines. For instance, I didn't know you couldn't buy, liquor in California and have it shipped to, Nevada. You got to go to California and pick up the bottle of wine. I don't drink wine, but a colleague of mine was walking me through his grievance for the weekend. But so unfortunately, the answer is it depends, but there are good folks out there that can really help with that. As far as any kind of, specific licensing goes, a really good stop is the Nevada Small Business Development Center, the SBDC. I think they have a lot of different resources there to help folks with.
There are also, even if you're not going to do government contracting, there's PTACs. Procurement Technical Assistance Centers that will help you explore a lot of these things as well. So that might be another resource, and I know there's a number in Nevada.
So the questioner clarified by saying, let's say it's jewelry and accessories, and let's just say that she creates a tribal corporation and she's selling it on tribal lands, but she does make it available online to whomever. Any thoughts, or are you still going to say it depends?
If it's on tribal land, I definitely do not know. I will say step one, if you're going to engage in any kind of commerce with a third party, is this entity formation piece is critical regardless of the kind of entity. You don't want to be sued individually, or, you know, something bad happens, a kid swallows a piece of jewelry and they say, I'm going to, you know, sue the maker because it was small and should have had a disclaimer that it could be swallowed, something to that effect. And if you have an entity, it's licensure, right? Whatever kind of state charter you need, county and city charter. Counties and cities are getting very big about enforcement. It's sort of like the, hey, you forgot about me syndrome. So it's looking at county and city and state level business licensing. You know, and I know some folks have sort of gone to online marketplaces and found some guidance there in the terms of use about what it takes to be able to sell on their particular marketplace. But aside from that, you know, I apologize. We have an entire consumer products group that helps people sell stuff online. I'm just not smart enough to be on that team.
All right, so Chris, you said the first place to really look into this stuff is the SBDC, and Peyton, you suggested PTAX, the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. If you were going to look for an attorney who could help with this, what type of attorney are they called?
I think looking for law firms that deal with e-commerce for selling anything online. E-commerce businesses face a lot of unique issues about not just, you know, the regulations that apply, but also to, you know, the type of information you gather from customers. Do you allow for online payments? Do you have a privacy policy, terms of use? What does the checkout store look like? Do you save people's credit card information, or is it disposed of? But yeah, any kind of attorney that focuses on e-commerce should be able to kind of help navigate. Setting up an e-commerce business is, to be candid, way more complicated than setting up a brick and mortar store in certain respects, because of all these different, you know, you're potentially operating in multiple jurisdictions. You don't necessarily know who the person purchasing is, and certain countries have limitations on, you know, how old a person has to be before they can engage in, you know, online commerce. So I definitely say, you know, I hate to say it, but Google or whatever your search bar is for an e-commerce attorney. That and there's so many folks now that have hyper focused practices that, to be candid, if you focused on and looking for an e-commerce attorney in the jewelry space, I almost guarantee you find someone that, you know, counsels just those types of companies.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to tag on too, since I work for the Department of Interior, there is an Indian Arts and Crafts Board within the Department of Interior that is charged with helping individual Indian entrepreneurs. So I would reach out to them directly.
Thanks, guys. Peyton, do you want to finish up, or was that your last? Sorry.
That's it. Yeah, I can
Okay.
hand it off.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Peyton. And we are going to be sharing these with all of our attendees as well. And I will hand it off to Chris if you're ready to go. Hey, Chris, are you there? Oh, there you go. Thanks, Chris. You might want to switch to slideshow so you don't have the speaker notes. Second thing on the top where it's display settings. Go left. Right there. Okay. Click on that. Have it swap. There you go. Perfect. Chris, I did your intro earlier. But if you want to start off with maybe just another brief introduction of yourself and some of your expertise, that would be great. I also think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Well, my name's Chris Myers. I'm a partner at a law firm called Holland & Hart. We're based in the Mountain West. I'm a corporate attorney. I started out my legal career as a securities regulator, both in California and Nevada. So my practice focuses on counseling entrepreneurs looking to raise outside capital on the formation, initial documentation of their business, and then raising capital. As people could probably tell, everything else I rely on my colleagues, and we find the right solution for different issues. I must say I commend everybody for being here outside of work hours, late in the evening. This is the grit it's going to take to run your own business. It's tremendously difficult, but hopefully with the resources you pick up here, combined with your already stellar motivation, hopefully this all helps. This is a pretty high level presentation. If you want all the good stuff, it's all in Peyton's. So this is a little bit, that was really good. So kind of getting into, my this presentation, where I start is, when should I organize? As you saw in Peyton's slides, forming an entity is a relatively costly process. I personally don't order soft drinks in restaurants. So if $3 is too much, forming an entity is a lot, unless it's the right circumstance. And so, this isn't necessarily legal advice. This isn't 2 + 2 = 4. There's a lot of gray in the law, but these are sort of the guideposts that I use, is when should I organize? And one of the key things is it starts to make sense to create the entity that you're going to use to run your business when you're starting to create assets that are going to be difficult to transfer. Intellectual property, licensing agreements, business opportunities or contracts, research grants. If you're going to sign a contract and you sign it in your personal name, you really want to pause and say, okay, what am I exposing from a personal perspective if I sign this contract in my name? Am I the only one that can perform the service? Can I not use employees or consultants or whoever I was going to have actually do the work? Am I personally liable now? And so when you start to sign contracts, that's really the time to pause and say, do I need an entity? And also, if you're worried about unforeseen, risks, customer supply contracts, employees, product liability, leasing or owning real property, that's really where if things can come back and personally expose your finances, that's really where you want to have a liability shield. That's an entity. And, the entity really it's a liability shield to the extent you use it correctly. There are horror stories out there about folks that, they form an entity, but then the entity doesn't actually protect them from liability because they didn't respect the entity. And what I mean by that is, people out there that, you have a company bank account, you need to maintain it separately. When you distribute out, it needs to be, if it's an LLC, a distribution guaranteed payment, or if it's a corporation, and you're trying to pay yourself, right? You hire yourself as an employee or you distribute it out as a stock dividend. You have to really, mind how money goes into and out of the entity. When you're engaging in contracts, right, it's not signing it in your individual name. And then if something goes south, say, I gotcha, I have an LLC, right? You want that entity to be, prominent. You sign your contracts in the name of that entity, and you respect the operations of that entity, again, through bank accounts, separate checkbooks, really do things in the name of the entity, and almost look at yourself as, well, I'm an employee, the entity is who you're doing business with. It also starts to make sense when you have multiple owners. Dealing with arrangements with, how you're going to split up profits and losses, equity of the business. That's with multiple people is really where it starts to make sense to have an entity. The common types and entity types that are out there, corporations, limited liability companies, and limited partnerships. These are sort of the 3 most popular. Now, each one of these can have a different tax status. So entity type and tax status are 2 totally different things. Oftentimes, corporations are taxed as C Corps or S Corps, but a limited liability company can likewise be taxed as an S Corp or a C Corp, or a tax partnership. An LLC with only one owner is what we call a disregarded entity, where it basically just rolls up to your Social Security number. Major considerations in thinking through what type of entity. Again, like I said, liability protections, income taxes, entity level tax versus flow through tax. If you're thinking of taking on international investors or nonprofit investors, if you have a nonprofit that you know of that is looking to make grants or investments in your business, nonprofits care about the type of tax structure you have because they can't have certain types of returns, like unrelated business taxable income is one of them. And then tax-free organizations or asset sales, the type of entity you are, if you're looking to build a business and sell it, you're going to care about your tax status on the front end. Ease of formation, familiarity of form, record keeping, employment taxes, different economic arrangements. One of the, I'm a big life hacker, and where can I go for things cheaper? And I think one of the best places you can go is to an accountant. As far as when you're thinking through what kind of tax makes sense for your type of business. You definitely, if you have an entity, want to upgrade from, H&R Block or whatever online tax filing service and go out and hire an actual accountant. They don't have to audit your financials, but an accountant that can help you just file your tax returns and really think through how to maximize the tax status of your business. And if they come back and say, hey, be a tax partnership, that's where an LLC can make sense. If they come back and say, hey, if you're going to go out and use a lot of debt on your business, you're going to go get a loan, you might raise debt from investors. That where it can start to make sense to have, a C Corp or some kind of blocker entity so that, you're not having to worry about debt forgiveness. There was a question that was asked about where to organize, Delaware or Nevada. There's other states out there too, but Delaware and Nevada are two of the more popular states. As I said before, venture capital tends to favor Delaware. Again, it's predictability of outcome. A lot of venture capital funds, they are themselves fiduciaries, right? They are not usually investing their money. They are investing their limited partners' money. And a lot of these limited partners are pension funds, nonprofits, teachers and police and firefighter unions that are allocating capital to, try and have, money for when they retire to pay out. And so those venture capital managers take that responsibility very seriously. And if all their portfolio companies being in Delaware just helps them with predictability, it's an ask they'll oftentimes make. Delaware tends to favor companies and directors. Nevada is a little bit of both, but I'd say it's better to be a director and an officer in Nevada than it is in Delaware. Delaware has, again, as I said before, Delaware has more experience. Corporate courts, it's called the Chancery Court. It's sort of, some of the best, corporate minds in the U.S. are on the Delaware Chancery Court, so it's kind of hard to beat. Delaware has, tried a lot of very significant cases, and so there's lots of legal precedent where people can look at and say, how is this issue going to shake out? It is more expensive to operate in Delaware, the way they do their franchise taxes. But Nevada is really starting to become an up-and-coming state. And I think if you form in Delaware and you are a Delaware corporation or a Delaware LLC or whatever it is, but you do business in the state of Nevada, you will likely have to qualify as a foreign entity here in Nevada, which means you're going to have two filings. So if you live in Nevada, I think it's a great starting point to argue for being a Nevada entity versus a Delaware entity and having to file two sets of entity filings every year. It's one more cost and one more thing to potentially miss. And if you're not in good standing in both states, it can lead to issues. One of the items I mentioned, and this is very popular, subchapter S elections or subchapter S corporations. This is very popular with closely held small businesses. It provides the entity of limited liability and pass-through taxation. It's simple to form. You basically incorporate under state law, and then you elect to be taxed as an S corp by filing something with the IRS. As good as S corps can be, they have a lot of downside and risks. I should say they're just a little bit brittle. And if you blow your S election, you can be in trouble. Some of the issues that are up here are burdensome tax rules. Again, because the benefits of an S corp are very real, so are the rules. So you can't have more than 100 shareholders. You can only have one class of stock. Employee options are okay. Only U.S. citizens, resident aliens. No entities except certain qualified trust tax exempt or plans in the states can be owners. Third-party debt not included in basis, and you're probably going to want a shareholder agreement to make sure nobody goes out and busts your S selection by transferring their stock to a person that's not allowed to be an owner of an S corp.
Can we pause for, sorry, Chris, just
Yep.
wanted to pause for 1 second for any questions in the room or online?
I have a comment about Delaware.
Okay.
They're not really good about sending reminders to renew your license, and they're really quick to charge late fees.
Yes, and one of the tremendous benefits of Nevada is Silver Plume. It's NV Silver Plume. It's an online business portal that you can use to manage most all entity types. I wouldn't necessarily use all their form, like I think they provide some form operating agreements and bylaws, but it allows you to manage your officer list, your annual filings, and if you keep the email active, it should send you sort of a reminder 30 days out. But NV Silver Plume is great. You don't have to go in person. You can kind of just do it all online.
Maggie, do we have any questions online?
No.
Thanks, Chris. Oh, wait, we have a question. Oh, please.
For a starter business, just like a really small business, would you recommend an S corp?
It really depends. If you are, because a corporation, if you want to set it up as a corporation versus an LLC, corporations come with a lot more maintenance. They need to have a board. They need to have officers. You have to have corporate stock. You have to have articles, bylaws. If you have multiple owners, you might have to have a stockholder agreement to kind of predict how certain key business decisions will be made outside of just voting stock. So an LLC, either taxed as a partnership or an S corp can be, a good alternative. LLCs are a little bit more difficult to kind of operate from the standpoint of you're going to want an operating agreement. They can get very complex. But, I'd say the crucial thing is to run the type of business that you want to form and, a few years of projected financials, right? You're not going to know exactly this is the kind of money I'm going to make. But if you look, go to an accountant and say, hey, this is my tentative business plan. I expect to spend a lot of money in startup capital, but then make money pretty quickly. An accountant may say, a pass-through entity is better, or you're not going to want to have all that income if you're going to be reinvesting it in the business to grow the business, maybe be a C corp. So that's a really good question for an accountant. And, they're going to want to kind of look at what's your next year or two look like as far as revenues goes. And hopefully they can help guide you to a tax status that is going to be the most beneficial for you. So you're not, either losing out on wanting to deduct losses or being allocated, basically income that you're reinvesting in the business and paying taxes on what we call phantom income. But an accountant is going to know how to answer that question much more succinctly for your facts and circumstances.
Okay, another question is, for small businesses to get a product into a tribal store, would the S corp be something good to consider?
As far as anything goes on operating on tribal land, I do not know. That if Peyton's still on, maybe that's a question for Peyton, but I unfortunately I do not know.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Peyton.
it really depends on the tribe, right? So if that tribe is actually owned and operated by the tribal leadership, and maybe it's a political instrumentality of the tribe, or who knows how that store is ran, right? Yeah, And if they, and I'm laughing, Chris, because it's really hard to kind of determine if tribe will give
Depends.
a deference to a state LLC if something goes wrong in their store. So I have no idea. I have no idea.
Okay, and then AB is asking some questions about the S corporation. So there have to be 100 or fewer shareholders. Can there be only one or two?
Yes, yeah, you can have one or two, it just can't be more than 100. And there is very strict limitations on who those people can be. The S corp is such a benefit that, again, if you violate what they call violate the X selection by either having impermissible owners, not the right classes of stock, too many stockholders, or not restrictions on transfer, you blow the S election and it leads to very negative tax consequences. So an S corp is a great benefit, but that before you go and form or check a box to be taxed as an S corporation, that is absolutely something that I would sit down with an accountant and make sure you kind of run them through in the front end, how money is going to flow through your business, who's going to own your business, how you envision selling your business, if that's a goal, right? Some people want to, form, build, and sell and repeat, and have that accountant, walk you through the pluses and minuses of the S selection, given the kind of business a person wants to have.
Okay, and there's no rules about the number of shares that any one person can own, correct?
No, it's not on the number of shares. No, it's just the number of stockholders.
Okay, and Caitlin's asking another question, and what I'm getting from what these attorneys are telling us is that you should do your research and then go talk to an accountant. It's like they're passing the buck to the accountants.
Correct. They're going to be cheaper, if that helps. I say that because, we have tax folks here that can answer all this. They're, $1,100 an hour or more. I would hope a CPA is,
Only 400 or 500.
at the most. Yeah, I would hope.
Mhm.
But the big thing is I think a lot of CPAs, if they look at it and say, hey, I'm going to use you to file my tax return, hopefully you can get that, sort of, initial consultation, establish that relationship, and, let that CPA know the real, money is going to be in filing the return and, any amendments, and, hopefully they can give you some upfront sort of thoughts. And because it's, taxes is their world, they can't pass the buck any further.
Okay, so point of clarification, if somebody is a CPA in Nevada, they have to know Nevada tax laws. If they're a CPA, does that transfer to different states? Like, is that basic knowledge that goes in each state, and then wherever they're based, they should know that state's laws?
So the S election is a federal tax election, so that's going to be federal law is sort of the starting point, the Internal Revenue Code. So CPAs are predominantly focused on starting point is federal law, and then accountants in different states will know how to comply with their state taxes. A CPA in California probably has a lot more knowledge and things to comply with than a CPA in the state of Nevada that doesn't have state income tax, for example.
Right, okay. Thank you.
If a company is trying to work its way to becoming a B Corp, would it make sense to initially incorporate as a public benefit corporation?
So public benefit corporations are, again, another very brittle thing. They have very, very strict requirements to be a B Corp. That is one that they are starting to, sort of increase in popularity a little bit. We have a group here, our nonprofit tax group, that does consulting on that. I think a lot of places will not. There's more than just us do that. But it is something that you really want to make sure you understand the limitation. There are so many different rules about having a B Corp. I believe most state laws allow for it. But you're going to want to make sure, is it allowed in the state that you want to form it in? What are the restrictions? And yeah, I think working with either an accountant or a tax lawyer to kind of work through, if I make this much in revenue, this is either the kind of salary I want to have or the salaries I want to have for employees. These are the kind of stockholders I'm going to have. And a lot of folks that go down the B Corp path, the more they learn, the more they think a different, either a traditional nonprofit 501c3 may make sense, or being a for-profit corporation that's engages a lot of charitable activity may make a lot of sense. But being a B Corp is a great mission. It's just got a lot of rules, and I would be doing you a disservice by trying to get into all of them on this call, because there's a lot.
Thank you. No more questions.
Back to you, Chris.
All right. So the next very common, very popular entity type is limited liability companies. Again, limited liability, they can have pass-through taxation, can have multiple classes of equity, flexible management, flexible economic arrangements. LLCs are sort of, if you're looking at starting an entity as learning how to ride a bike, an LLC is sort of the bike with training wheels. It's going to have some corporate formalities, but it's, articles in an operating agreement, whereas a corporation is sort of articles, bylaws, maybe a stockholder agreement. In an LLC, the operating agreement kind of acts as the contract amongst all the owners, and you can kind of really carve up different rights in a variety of very unique ways, which, really helps kind of if you have any kind of unique economic or voting or management type arrangements with multiple founders, can make an LLC an attractive option. Some of the disadvantages, though, is the operating agreements can be complex. I will say one of the least favorite things that most of our associates like to do is draft operating agreements, because they're hard. Precedent only gets you so far, because most people's deal is unique. Also, venture capital is not really, I don't want to say not a fan, but venture capital tends to not like investing into limited liability companies. They're, number one, they're very atypical to be a vehicle that IPOs or has an initial public offering. Capital accounts, basis, all those kind of things, from an accounting and tax perspective, are a lot more complicated in an LLC if it's taxed as a partnership. So it's got a lot of benefits, but oftentimes I have folks that kind of go from sole proprietorship, they're iterating on their idea, they're thinking about what they want to do, they come up with the core concept, and they're either going to go pursue patents or something, and they'll maybe be an LLC because there's flow through tax, they're thinking they're going to have some losses, it's a little bit cheaper to be an LLC. And then when they go out and start to raise money, they'll convert from an LLC to a corporation. That's, really quick, kind of the lifestyle I see of a lot of emerging growth businesses. Although some people will stay LLCs and say, it's fine. Some of the potential difficulties, though, again, they're a little bit more difficult to deal with on the tax side than a corporation. And to be candid, not all CPAs are created equal in following an operating agreement with respect to unique allocations of capital, profits and losses. You're really, again, I think one of the most important things an entrepreneur can do is invest in a good an accountant, and that relationship. And I think a part of that is, if you're going to have an operating agreement that has a really complex breakup of how you're allocating profits and losses, is make sure your accountant kind of takes a look at the operating agreement and they understand it, and that they'll do your taxes and keep your books in accordance with that operating agreement, versus if it's something that's a little too complicated for them, for that CPA, you don't want to find out after the fact. So LLCs can be fun, but they can be complex as you want them to be. Putting together a corporation, you have to have a board of directors. So state law requires at least one. For a lot of startups that are looking to kind of build a community, right, build a brand, Warren Buffett, he talks about how he likes to invest in brands, because a brand is, iconic, you kind of generate a customer following. And one way to do that is through people that have kind of been there before. And so if your board of directors, that is like, who you would let, dog sit for you or watch your kids. A director is someone that you implicitly trust. Is intelligent, is not going to bring drama, because a board of director is a statutory position. And if they start voting, doing stuff that's weird, it can really, unfortunately lead to the downfall of the business kind of out of the gates. If your board isn't getting along well. A good sort of second level below the board would be a board of advisors. A lot of consumer products businesses that I work with that are very focused on brand recognition really heavily rely on a board of advisors. And the board of advisors is, oftentimes, they're compensated through equity, and they'll be like brand ambassadors, essentially, social media influencers, right? They hold your product up and they have 2 million followers, and they tell you, hey, if your product had a cooler label, maybe you get more sales. So a board of advisors can be a great sort of think tank and place for people to go and sort of build your community, build your brand awareness, and get people out there kind of advocating for the company. Once you really start, things start to go well, and you have revenues and you got cash laying around and you're reinvesting in the business, looking for things to, what can we do to make this place, I call it, right, adding all the window treatments, the paintings on the wall, you're building out the infrastructure. Directors and officers insurance is a great thing. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses, regardless of the kind of success you have, the type of business you have, will eventually be sued. Lawsuits can come from all areas. It can come from customers. It can come from suppliers and vendors. It can come from stockholders or investors. And D&O insurance is a great tool to try and make sure you're not in a fight alone, and you have someone to, a war chest to help, with those fights. Relatively inexpensive. Relatively is the key word there. D&O insurance is actually, can get pricey depending on the amount of coverage. But it's definitely something people want to take a look at once there's revenues and cash flow in the business to justify going out and purchasing insurance. Likewise, the same goes for if you're a product company and you're selling products, product liability insurance, whatever you can do to insulate your business, insurance is a good tool to do that. We talked about it a little bit, but preparing for investors is a very exciting time for a company, but it's going to be a very busy one. Most founders I talk to, once they're done raising money, they don't ever want to raise money again. It is extremely difficult. There are from a time perspective, because you're running your business and raising money at the same time. And you basically, for the period of time you're raising money, have a job and a half to 2 jobs, because it is very time consuming. One of the key things to think about when you're raising money from outside investors is the obligation you're taking on to be a good steward for your investors' capital. Not every investor is a faceless organization, right? When people write you a check and they're betting on your business, that is a very meaningful thing that a founder or an entrepreneur needs to take serious and understand. You're a fiduciary of that capital, and you don't want to take it unless you kind of know the things you're going to be spending it on. You're going to want to disclose to investors what you're going to be spending their money on in advance, and make sure you have total alignment with your investors. I call it a total understanding of where the money's coming from, what the money will be used for, and kind of the plans for the business long term. If you're raising money from an investor that expects you to sell the business in 2 years, and you're building a business that you want to pass down to your kids or next generation, that's not in alignment with that investor's expectations, and things will not go well. The other thing you have to look at is compliance with federal and state securities laws. There are a litany of securities exemptions out there to allow entrepreneurs to raise money. There's something called the Jobs Act was passed in 2012 by President Obama. The Jobs Act stands for Jumpstart Our Businesses Startups Act. And what it did was it made it very streamlined for startups to raise money. So, there is almost infinite amounts of ways to raise money in a compliant way And so not doing it in a compliant way will just be viewed as, inexcusable by a securities regulator. So it's really, a great opportunity to go out and raise capital, to build a business, to employ people. It's a great calling, but you got to do it in a compliant way. When you're raising money, it's all people rush and they, you watch an episode of Silicon Valley and it's what's the valuation? Is it a pre-money valuation? Is it a post-money valuation? If you can't think of the value of your business because you're sitting there going, well, I don't know what it is yet. There's all kinds of alternative ways to raise money. Things like simple agreements for future equity, convertible notes, entering into a borrowing arrangement, going to the SBA. There's all different ways to access capital. But if you can't value your business and you think it's going to be worth a lot once you get to some sort of measurable, right? Whether it be some threshold of monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue, or getting a patent granted, or scaling users to some level. If you think you're going to hit some benchmark like that in, quintuple or more the value of your business, do you really want to sell a bunch of it early on for cheap? Because equity can be much more expensive than debt if you don't value your business correctly. And so things like simple agreements for future equity, convertible notes, or just, a loan from an SBA type entity will allow you to raise money in a way where you're not kind of giving up a bunch of equity too early on. Two of the other things, is really focus, if you're going to go out and raise money from people, is focus on raising money from accredited investors that are going to add value to your organization, especially really early on. If a person comes to you and says, here's $100,000, that's a hard thing to say no to. But you want to make sure that's not all their money, right? You want to make sure that person is, high net worth, they're sophisticated, and ideally, they're going to have something more for you than just a check, right? They'll be able to say, hey, I built an online jewelry business. I really like your jewelry though. And so I want to invest in your business and I can help you navigate all the e-commerce stuff, or I have the contacts with lawyers or later stage investors, or I can get us into, big box stores or these trade shows. Or if you have a food and beverage product, and you have an investor and they say, hey, I know some big co-packer and they can, package your product for 1/5 what you're paying now, right? It's finding investors, particularly at the early stage, that will add value to your specific business beyond just the dollar amount. And again, people have gotten so focused in this space where you can literally go online and type in the kind of business you have and, and investment fund and investor, and likely find either, some kind of institutional investor, venture capital group, early stage investment group that invests just in that vertical, because it's hyper specialization is sort of the, what I'm seeing in the investment space right now. And, there's groups out there that like only invest in gluten-free, food and beverage companies. There's people out there that invest only in like grass-fed, startups. So there's an audience out there for the type of, either capital or customer you're seeking, and it's worth that investment. Once you start to raise money though, that's when you start to sign up to all the big time responsibilities, right? Investors are probably going to want audited financials at some point in time. There's something called 409A, which is a valuation safe harbor if you're going to be issuing equity to employees and consultants. Once you have, value in the business, issuing equity becomes a lot more complicated, as does your overall tax planning. So any questions? Sorry, I went way over, but if there are any additional questions that I can answer, happy to help.
Any questions in the room? Any questions online?
Yes. It's a kind of a specific question, Chris. And you used to live here in Vegas, so maybe you know. Dawn is asking, is a county event license and LLC good options for tablecraft sales, farmers markets, and powwows?
So a great place to go for that is the Nevada Secretary of State, either on their website, because unfortunately I don't know, or the Nevada SBDC. But the Secretary of State, I will say I've heard folks go out and they do either, a trade show or whatever. They don't have a business license. It's a great question to ask. The fact that you're thinking of that is tremendous. But I'd say the Secretary of State, depending on the type of event or venue, make sure you have the right license. Because there's parts of where you go, well, I'm in the city of Las Vegas or I'm in unincorporated Clark County. You might have to have 2 licenses. But the SBDC, if you're in Las Vegas, all those groups are kind of in one location. Not the Secretary of State, but all those other licensing groups are there, and they can kind of give sort of a one-stop shop, hopefully, on things that you should have for an event like that.
Yeah, I know the city requires even an event license if you're just doing a one-time event. I
Yeah,
don't know if you have to do the county and the city at times.
Yeah, I don't know if the specific location matters, but I know I've heard of folks, they do, an investor pitch. And, someone shows up and says, hey, you're, doing business and you need a license. So it's definitely a thing.
Okay, I also refer people to the Department of Business and Industry. They have that business roadmap, and it's an interactive map that has resources and licensing, because they're in charge of doing all the licensing for like hairstylists and different businesses that are required to have licenses.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing I can tell an entrepreneur is you're going to have to, figure out solutions to complex problems all the time. And if you can start with, online access to information or the government agency's website, or going into, either Governor's Office of Economic Development, a small business development center, or even working with like an SBA type lender, and try and get that information for free. Every dollar saved is a dollar spent on your business. And there are lots of resources out there. Also, Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, they have certain requirements to become a client of the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. I believe there's Legal Aid Center of Northern Nevada as well, or Nevada Legal Services. Some of those organizations are large and can really help with different issues. But they're not going to be I'll be your startup lawyer, but I think they can help with a lot of different issues.
Yeah.
And Chris, sorry, go ahead, Peyton.
I was just going to tag on to that, what Chris just said. I know I'm not in Nevada, but in Colorado at the Denver Indian Center, we do legal nights, right? Free legal nights where we bring in professionals in specific industries and make sure that entrepreneurs, business owners, and even families that may have, family legal issues, have access. So there may be nonprofits in your area that provide those services as well.
Thank you. There is another question here, maybe for Chris. Is there a rule of thumb for when to stay as an LLC and when to go after venture capital or people to invest in your company?
Yes. So, if you are looking, it's not necessarily, don't take this as legal advice, that, talk to the actual lawyer, the CPA first. I had to go to law school for 8 years to learn how to be scared of everything. But I'd say a really good measurement is if you are going to go raise outside capital from an investor, that is really where it starts to make sense to convert to a corporation. Things just get more complicated the longer you wait. And something that you have to look at on the tax side is if you are a tax partnership, a disregarded entity, right, some kind of flow through tax status. If you have debt on your books, you run the risk of when you convert to a corporation, of what's called debt forgiveness. And if you have debt forgiveness or cancellation of debt, it can be taxed at ordinary income rates if you don't have corresponding offsetting losses. And so if you go out and you say, you know what, I'm going to take on an SBA loan for $1 million. And, a week later you say, you know what, I changed my mind. I'm just going to file bankruptcy, or I don't want to deal with this business. In that moment, that $1 million could be taxable to the owner of that LLC because it's a disregarded entity, and you have a tax bill as if you got paid $1 million. Also, I've seen folks go out and they raise convertible notes, or whatever instrument as an LLC, and they're successful. And they go, then an investor comes along and says, "Hey, you need to convert from a LLC tax as a partnership to a C corp," and they'll go and they'll convert. And they just think it's, ordinary business. On Tuesday, I was an LLC raising convertible notes. On Wednesday, I'm a corporation raising convertible notes. That conversion, because that entity is no longer flow through, could likewise be considered cancellation of debt taxable to the owners, which would be a devastating moment for an entrepreneur, because IRS bills are very real. They can lien wages, they can garnish Social Security benefits. I mean, taxes are a no joke moment. And if you're going to raise institutional capital, you're most likely at some point in time going to be asked to be a corporation. And so it just can be a lot easier if you just go ahead and bite that bullet and convert to a corporation before you really start to take on too many outside investor dollars, particularly debt dollars.
Okay, and Fawn's just commenting that it seems to her that you have more control of decision-making when you own the business with no investors versus getting outside investors who can make decisions for you.
Correct. Once you take on an outside investor, they're essentially a boss. Because, you can disregard them. You can say, you don't own enough of the business to make me do anything. You're a very small investor. Your vote doesn't mean anything. They still could have a cause of action if they decide that you're not running the business appropriately, if they think you're misappropriating corporate opportunities, or just, if they just think, you're not doing a good job. Or they think, you didn't tell me what you were going to use the money for. I've seen instances where a founder, goes out, raises a couple $100,000 from an investor, goes and spends it on what they want to spend it on. And the investor comes back and says, "Hey, I thought you were going to spend that money on R&D, not, salary for yourself. And so now I'm going to sue you. And I might even report you for securities fraud." So, taking on outside investors is definitely not something to be done lightly. Aside from making sure you have securities exemptions that comply with federal and state law, it's just the practical part of being on the same page with your investor before you take their money. And if they say, "Hey, I want to invest in a business that's going to build and try and sell itself," and you're like, "I want to build a business and try and sell it," and you're on the same page and you tell them what the money's going to be used for, I really think taking on investors can be a great thing to help grow your business. But if you're not on the same page with your people, with prospective investors, you're avoiding a lot of headaches by taking money from a person that you're already not in alignment with.
Fair warning, huh?
Yeah, doom and gloom. I used to be a securities regulator, so fair warning.
And people are unpredictable, right, Chris? I mean, that's the big thing with the more people you have involved, the more opinions you have, and the more incentives you have that may not align, right, with whatever business it is. So just be aware.
100%. It only takes one. That's all I can say is, if you raise money from 100 people, that's 100 fingers and toes crossed, hoping that you stay in alignment with all of them. Mm-hmm. So it's especially for either a first time or not super experienced founder, really limiting that investor base to trusted, knowledgeable, accredited investor folks that are on the same page will really go a long way. But it's never a predictor, right? It's all you can do is try and mitigate risk as a business owner, and that's why you charge more than what your product costs to make, because as an entrepreneur that takes on all that risks, that has to deal with lawyers telling you, "Ask your CPA," that's a knock on me, not on Peyton. There's a reason you get an upside at the end, right? If everything goes well, because you have to be rewarded for that entrepreneurial activity, all that risk, all that stress, all that effort. And I hope everybody on here, experiences that in leaps and bounds. Or if you're focused on, going, what, that's not for me, but I want to have the best B Corp or set up a nonprofit that's mission focused. Those are all things that are positive and, can be done. And quite frankly, they're probably a little bit easier than taking outside investor capital, at least on the front end.
Thanks, guys. I think that was really helpful. So I think we're a little over time, but guys, if you wouldn't mind sharing your contact information, maybe on the Slack, or we can share it if you're okay with that on Slack. And people reach out to you directly if they have more questions. Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, sure. Right. Full disclosure, if you know, I can't provide legal advice without running conflicts and all that good stuff, but you know, happy to be a good connector. There's lots of tremendous resources here in the state of Nevada. I will say groups like StartUpNV, GoEd, you know, there are a lot of very, very good people doing whatever they can to make sure that we, you know, there's avenues to diversify our economy here in Nevada. And I'm happy to play connector if that's all I can be. But yeah, feel free to reach out anytime.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks, Peyton put his email in the chat already. So
Oh,
appreciate that. You guys
thanks,
were
Peyton.
great. Thanks so much.
And for everybody online, we'll see you hopefully in person on Wednesday, because as I've said, we're hustling snacks and they're good ones. And everybody else that's in the room, I'm hoping that we get to see you guys in person again on Wednesday. Until then, hope you guys have a great few days.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Peyton.
Thanks.
Bye.
Great
Thank
stuff.
you all.